Hello, happy to be here and happy everyone can see me. Yeah, as I said, I'm Brady. Welcome to the Junior Developer Happy Hour. We've been doing this for about 3 months, maybe at this point. And Sam and I both went to Dev Bootcamp in different locations, different years, but we both recognized about the time when quarantine hit that it was going to be even crazier for junior devs to get their first job in tech. So we started up these meetups for people to come and just do Q&A, like AMA style, ask me anything, and hopefully get all of your questions answered and help you all go out and get amazing jobs now that you have finished either a boot camp or a CS degree or are approaching the end. So the way, let's see. Yeah, Sam has already posted a Slido link in the chat. It should be the very first message in our chat. So in our Jitsi messages, that's where you can find the link to that. The Slido is the best place for people to post questions that they have, and then you can upvote them. So that makes sure that we are trying to get to all the questions that most people are interested in hearing answers for. And then if you have some sort of follow-up question, go ahead and put that right in the Jitsi chat. We should be able to keep up with them. Although last time I saw a couple that slipped through the cracks. I think that is about it. We also have a Slack group, so we can put that in the chat soon, in case people are interested in joining there, because we post, even Sam is awesome at posting a ton of resources and letting people know about new events that are happening in the industry. That's about it for the meetup. I'm Brady. Like I said, went to a boot camp. I graduated in 2017. I have been working at a company called Trunk Club ever since. And I am, for the past year, mostly a front-end developer, working with React. Our back end is Ruby. The first year and a half or so, I was working a lot in our back end. I didn't have a tech background before I decided to go into this industry. I liked learning foreign languages. I studied Spanish, minored in Italian, moved to a German-speaking country for a couple of years. And then eventually discovered that computer languages were really cool too, and I could make cool things with them, and that's why I decided to make the switch. That's enough about me. I'll let Sam introduce himself, and then we can let Avner introduce himself after that.
Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Sam. I'm currently a front-end engineer at Lyft. I went to the bootcamp kind of a long time ago, 2013. I was in one of the earlier cohorts in San Francisco. Spring 2013, I went to Dev Bootcamp. And so I've been developing professionally for about 7 years now, mostly front end for the past 4 or 5 years. And I took a really long path to get here. I actually have a computer science degree as well. I got it a long time ago though. Graduated during the dot-com bust, gave up pretty quickly looking for a job. I didn't know what I was doing. I think I gave up within 6 months, which is probably one of the biggest mistakes ever made. But I also went on a wild journey, so maybe it wasn't a mistake. I ended up working in the mortgage industry for years. And then when that blew up in 2008, I said, screw it. And I left America. I joined the Peace Corps, hoping things would get better. By the time I got back, which it did, I spent 3 years in West Africa teaching people how to use computers, mostly just hanging out with people. Peace Corps' mission is 2/3 of their mission is cultural exchange. So it's not just all like teaching people stuff. It's just hanging out with people and just getting to know the people in the community and stuff. And then when I came back, I actually found out about Dev Bootcamp when I was sitting in the middle of the sub-Saharan desert in Burkina Faso. I somehow had a slow internet connection that I could get. Sometimes it was expensive and slow, but I could download my Gmail sometimes. So I subscribed to TechCrunch and I read an article about Dev Bootcamp, and then I was like, this is what I'm gonna do when I get back. I'm gonna try a second attempt at breaking into the industry, and I did it the second time. And yeah, I did all kinds of stuff, contract work, trying to help my friends start a startup, worked at a bunch of different companies, and finally I ended up at Lyft for now, at least. Okay, that's my intro. I'll let Avner, is that how you say your name? Avner?
I've actually put a pronunciation guide
Oh,
in my name on here. It's Avner. That's Av like
oh,
avocado, Nair like the
oh,
hair removal product.
I
Uh,
see it.
I taught at Dev Bootcamp for a couple of years. I'll talk about that a little bit more when I go through my sort of work history. But I got pretty good at teaching people how to pronounce my name because we had a new cohort every 3 weeks. So thanks, DBC, for that. Am I coming through? Can you all hear me? Well, great.
Yep, yep.
Hi, my name is Avner. I am a senior software engineer at Jellyvision. If you're not familiar with Jellyvision, that's probably okay. We make software that we sell to HR teams, but it's pretty cool software. My background, I studied computer science in college. I went to UIC here in Chicago. After that, I worked for a couple of years at a consultancy. I'm, basically have been working at a new place every 2 to 3 years after that until I went to Dev Bootcamp, where I taught, which was awesome. It was a great experience, very difficult experience, but it was great. It's where I met Braidy and a bunch of other awesome people. And then I was an engineering manager briefly after that, and have returned to the sort of individual contributor track when I joined Jellyvision. I have worked at a really wide range of companies, from small web development consultancies to Nielsen, which is ginormous. I think they have some absurd 30,000 employees or something like that. So everything from small sort of mom and pop web development to enterprise startups, kind of everything in between. So I have quite a range of experience with different kinds of companies and different kinds of software development. Still mostly focused around web development, though.
Awesome. Thank you. So I do see a couple of questions rolling on in. I will go ahead and start with the one on top. So as a junior dev, much of the time you may not have control of the stack you get your first job in. Does that matter? Or is experience, no matter what, the most important thing?
I think, so first of all, that's a good question. I think it's important to think about what your trajectory is and where you're trying to get to. With that said, the hardest job to get is going to be your first one. So I think that there are some considerations. So less than, I wouldn't rank stack as being super important, but I know a lot of graduates and of bootcamp, like DBC grads, as well as other people just trying to break into tech, have taken roles as a support engineer or things like that. where there's often like some promise of some limited coding. And, I think especially if you're, if you're running short on money, a job is a job. But or if you're genuinely interested in that, support engineer trajectory, that makes sense. I haven't seen a lot of people successfully move from, say, support engineer into software engineering. Most of the time, support engineers and that department considers themselves just as important, and they don't really have a track that crosses into software engineering because that's another team, right? So, it's something to be aware of, that's not actually. I think it's more helpful than no job in tech, but not that much. You'll probably still be doing a lot of the things you're doing now, building things on your own in order to prove that you can make that transition. And you're probably not going to make it at that company. And that kind of sets you up to not have the greatest time in that job, in that role, because you're not actually like interested or committed to it. And it's also going to be harder to get that job if you tell your prospective boss that like your plan is not to do that job anymore. So I think that's the kind of thing that I would focus on more than the stack. With that said, like, if you have, some choosing that you can do, then it might make sense. I think still more than stack, things like front end versus back end, or, it depends on where you want to go with your career, right? Like, ideally, whatever your first job in tech is more than just your first job in tech. And it's okay if it is, but that's where you're going to make a lot of your, first connections in tech. That's where you're going to, learn a lot about software engineering at that first job. And so there can be a sense that it's hard to switch. So my first job out of college was a C# shop, which, like, I had never worked in C#. My first day, they handed me a book like that thick and said, okay, read that book. That's your, right? Like, read these chapters, follow this tutorial. That's your task for this sprint, right? So I sat there and taught myself C#. And then it was harder to get jobs or to transition to jobs using other stacks, in part because it was just such an easier sell. Like, I already know the main thing that especially when applying for, like, not junior, I wasn't applying for junior developer roles, but not senior engineer, right? Like, the higher you go, the more sort of language agnostic people both expect you to be, and the people interviewing you are kind of care less about it. So, I think a lot of those feelings came from me. I had sort of I'd prefer not to be using Microsoft. I'd prefer to be doing maybe Ruby or something else, but like, I didn't make the effort that would have required to get those jobs. I applied to places that used other languages, but I didn't, build any side projects in that language to prove that I could do it. I don't know that would have done the trick, but looking back, it's easy for me to say, like, I felt pigeonholed, but part of that came from myself. And so that's something to be aware of, but I don't think it's super important in terms, like, maybe that controls where you're applying if you're applying selectively, but I also think that it's really important to just get that first job. If it doesn't fit the trajectory you want exactly, that's okay. It just means you may need to put more work into the next step.
Yeah, I like your point about the support engineer roles. Especially because people that may have heard me here talking about my first position in tech was a support engineer role. And I felt okay taking that. First of all, mostly because I didn't realize that there could be an issue moving on to actually becoming a software engineer from that role. But before I considered it being an issue to look out for, I had already met 2 or 3 people who had made that switch, going from software engineer support up to actual software engineer on a feature team. So if ever you're able to see in a company and just like talk openly about this trajectory that you're interested in, if you have seen people actually make that move, I feel like that's a good sign, even though it's not very common. The more I go out and talk to people in the world.
Yeah, it's a super common, I think, path. Maybe super common is overstating it, but for people who graduate from boot camps, I've seen a lot of people do it successfully. I've seen people do it and really struggle. So yeah, your mileage may vary, I suppose. I did have one company I worked at where they were surprisingly good about allowing people to sort of switch roles. I had the QA engineer on my team. One of the QA engineers that I worked with had started out at this is at Coyote Logistics, which is a third party. What does 3PL stand for? Third party logistics company, right? Sorry, it's been a while since I worked there. I'm losing the lingo. Anyways, he started out on the sales floor and then using the software that the engineering team built, and then moved to supporting the salespeople and other people using it, and then into QA. And through that experience had gained so much knowledge about the product, so much context that most of us didn't have. And through his stint on support especially, he knew where all the bodies were buried for that software. So he was a great QA engineer and he wanted to be a developer. But they never changed his salary through all of those job changes. And so he knew he was going to get just absolutely totally underpaid if he tried to stay there and be a developer there. So he went off somewhere else and is doing, he's a software engineer now. Actually, he runs his own consultancy now, but and they lost him because they were dumb.
Yep. Sometimes. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna add that you can also just try it out. Some people actually like it, being a support engineer or QA or whatever. Like, just because you went to a boot camp doesn't mean you have to be a web developer. Like, tons of people I did dev boot camp with are doing all kinds of different stuff in tech. They either moved on to like product management or some support engineers and still doing it. And actually moved up, like within like the support engineers. People became entrepreneurs. The CEO of HitCamp was in the cohort before me at Dev Bootcamp. So she started her own company. There's key values. She went to Dev Bootcamp after me. She started her own company. So there's many different paths you can take. Just don't feel like you have to be a web developer. Just keep that in mind.
Yeah, I tried to throw that caveat on there that, but maybe I didn't do it strongly enough that like, if you're interested in that role, like there's no conflict, right? Because you actually want to do that job. The conflict only exists if your trajectory is immediately takes you out of that role and into a totally different department and team. And yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and we do have a couple of follow-up questions about like what are the responsibilities of a support engineer, and QA as well.
Yeah. So having never performed those jobs myself, I'm not going to commit to a complete answer, but and I will say it also depends on the team and the company. So in my experience, QA roles tend to fall somewhere on a spectrum from on the one hand, manual QA to automated QA on the other hand. So like, and it's often a spectrum. There's, companies have you doing some manual QA, some test automation, things like that, or you might be, there's also software development, SDET, software development engineer in test, something like that. Anyways, where you're building like testing infrastructure, right? Not just writing tests, but writing infrastructure to make testing easier to do, right? So, which can be there can be some really interesting problems to solve there. But basically, the way it usually goes, or often goes in my experience, is, the software engineers work on a feature and then they say it's done, but it's not actually done because QA has to sign off on it, which means that you have to put it usually in like a staging environment or a QA environment where they can access it. And then if they're manually testing, they'll probably have like a series of actions that they run through. Like, okay, here's all the things that I expect to go wrong. Here's all the things that it's supposed to do, and kind of manually confirm that the feature is working as expected, and and they haven't found any regressions, any things that used to work but no longer do. And if they find anything, then they'll kick it back to the engineers, who will then fix it, and there can be some back and forth. And then also QA can be involved in releases. So after you go to production, QA may hop onto production and make sure that everything's still working. On the more automated side, they might be writing integration tests or even unit tests, depending on how. Most of the places I've been, the developers, the software engineers, are expected to write their own unit tests. But then if everyone's familiar with the testing pyramid, right, you've got the basis unit testing, and then integration testing is a smaller slice on top, and the very top, the fewest, is behavior test, right? So those two top, right, integration and behavior tests are things that you might expect a more automation focused QA engineer to work on. And then support engineer. So I would say that the closest I've worked with support engineers is at my current company at Jellyvision. And I'd say they're mostly, so when they're who our users go to when there's an issue with our software. So they're the sort of first line of handling user issues. And so a lot of times, there are workarounds, or there are, known issues, and they can sort of be like, we know about this, it's being worked on, or like, yes, here's what you need to do to get around that. Or they can, loop in engineers and business folks who might need to be aware of an ongoing incident. And they are, they don't write code that goes in our applications for the most part, although one of them did submit a PR a couple of weeks ago, which was pretty cool. But they do have some like infrastructure and code that they write for themselves to help make their own jobs easier. And they also are writing queries against the database sometimes to kind of, figure out the scope of an issue, right? Like, oh, we realize there's this bug where, the status is being set wrong on all of these records. Like, okay, let's write a query so we can see who all the affected customers are, something like that.
Yep, that sounds like a lot of what I did.
Oh yeah, why didn't I just let you answer that question? Sorry, Brady.
Oh man, it cut out. I didn't hear
I
what
said,
you
why
just
didn't I let you answer that question? Sorry.
Oh, that's all right. You did just fine. Here, I was looking up to see if there was like a testing pyramid.
Oh, diagram.
Whoops. Yeah. Let's see if I can. I'll send that later. Cool. I'm just going to go ahead and move on to the next question. What types of companies tend to hire junior developers or offer apprenticeships? Man, that's a good question. I wonder.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I have an answer for that.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing that I would say apprenticeships. I mostly see apprenticeships from companies that are doing pretty well financially, either because they're just doing well or they've got a lot of VC cash to burn. I don't. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I see a lot of connection between the companies that hire junior developers. I think a good question to ask when you're interviewing is like, what is the breakdown of the team in terms of seniority? Because that tells you something about their priorities. And whether, I think I'll say this, companies that hire junior developers should be planning to invest in them for the long haul. I won't say that they all do, but they should be, right? Your mileage may vary on that one too.
So would you expect, when you're asking for the breakdown of seniority on a team, would you expect there to be a lot of juniors, or you would hope for more seniors to be able to mentor the juniors?
I usually expect it to be not exactly pyramid shaped, but heading that way, right? Which makes a certain amount of sense. But yeah, I think, yeah, I'll say that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You can also like follow like Bootcamp, like people on Twitter and stuff. They talk about like which companies are hiring a lot of their students and stuff. Like the CEO of Lambda School, he does that all the time. That's his Twitter handle. So he'll be like, oh, this company hired 8 Lambda school students or stuff like that. So you can just follow social media like Bootcamp people to like kind of see where the trends are going, which companies are like starting to hire a lot of boot camps and stuff.
That's a good point. I know I was kind of in the process of interviewing at Trunk Club and had found out how many people they had already hired from my boot camp. And I guess there was like a relationship between the career coaches and the company. So I wonder, even if you're just reaching out to different people who have gone through boot camps, or if you can find career coaches from different boot camps to get an idea of if any of those boot camps have relationships with different companies.
Yeah. Speaking of that, we do have a career coach from Rhythm School who's going to be on Junior Developer Happy Hour the first Saturday in October. I put up the event on our meetup earlier this week. I can dig up the link. I gave a talk earlier this week at Rhythm School. So I asked him if he wanted to come join the show.
Excellent. All right, next one. How many projects do you recommend we should highlight on our portfolio when searching for that first job?
I think I would say it depends on what it depends on what you're trying to do. I think quality over quantity is important, but also like what role and what company you're applying for is also important. So unfortunately, the answer is it depends. But you should try and align what you're highlighting with what you think the company is looking for, right? Let's say you've got a Ruby on Rails project and you've got a Django project. Does anyone still use Django? Anyways, or a Node.js, there we go, right? You've got a Node.js project, right? If you're applying at a Ruby shop, you should show your Ruby on Rails project. If you're applying at a Node shop, highlight the other one. So if the question is like, how do I know when I'm done with, like, how do I know when I have enough projects? Then it's less about quantity and more about matching what you're doing to the jobs you're trying to get, right? Because part of what you're doing with these projects is you're trying to prove that you can already do what you're going to be asked to do on the job. And I think there's value in sort of a finished product because it shows that you can complete things. There's value in also having some like next steps that you'd like to do so you can show how you think ahead and how you think about users or product or, all of which are good things to be able to show. But the purpose of the project at its core is saying, look, I can already do this. So you want to match what you're highlighting to what the company and the team is going to be doing, or so that you can, so that resonates with them. Like, oh yes, like they don't need to imagine, well, that's Node, but we're a Ruby shop, but it translates, right? They don't need to do that step because it's like, yes, I already did the Ruby thing you do all day.
Yeah, I think that also kind of implies something that I like to tell people to, even if you end up not being picky in the job that you accept, if you can set some time aside and try to think about, if you could like invent the job of your dreams, what would that look like? Like, is there a language that you're comfortable with and you'd like to stick with that language? Or is there a language that you're really interested in learning and maybe you would aspire to learn that language. Like think about which language, size of the company potentially, location. If you can just have that in your mind. I didn't even realize that I had it, but all of a sudden I got presented with this job offer and I was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly the thing that I wanted. And I think it's worth giving yourself a little bit of a target. Again, you don't have to say no to other job offers, but then you can know kind of what sort of projects you want on that portfolio and have a little bit of direction.
Yeah. Another thing I'll say, I did this earlier on in my career. I haven't added to it in a long time, but I used to build the same project in different languages, partially as an exercise in partially as a way to like learn new languages, partially as an exercise in seeing like what's different about solving the same problem from one language to the other. And another thing that lets you do is that you have the same project, right? It's easy enough for you to talk about it because you've done it several times, but then you can just pick and choose, right, which language you want to start with. And I also found that to be something that interviewers found interesting, right? Like, oh, you're sort of diving in and looking at the differences between how to implement it in different languages. I think people found that interesting. So that's another thing that can be another useful, I think, way to think about this question.
Yeah. All right, next question up here. How would your advice change for grads that are not in their 20s and early 30s? How do you combat that unspoken rule that you need to be younger to get into tech?
Yeah, that's, I want to start off by saying that like, I don't have this personal experience. I got into tech right after college. So I don't think I'm the best person to answer this. I'd highly recommend seeking out other folks who join tech later in life.
That's me.
There you go. So maybe you should take point on this one.
So I didn't get my first developer job till I was 34, I think, after I came back from Peace Corps. Wait, what was the whole question? It disappeared.
Sorry. It was, how would your advice change for grads that are not like younger than early 30s? How do you combat that unspoken rule that you should be younger to get into tech?
Oh, I just don't even think about it. One thing, to remove bias, I remove all the dates on my resume regarding education. So my boot camp and my CS degree are both on my resume. I put it all the way at the bottom though. I think that's the least important, at least since I have experience in the industry now. So I just removed the dates to there. Everyone has unconscious bias, you know, so removing the dates removes that bias. They don't know how old I am. So that's one thing I think that helps. And then I just don't think about it. I just keep making stuff and networking with people, and I just concentrate on just getting better and making new connections, even when I was first starting out. So I didn't focus on like looking for a job. My thought was that if I just keep getting better and meeting new people, the job will come to me. And it did. It probably took longer than for me to get a full-time job than most people. I don't think I got my first full-time job after boot camp till probably about a year after I graduated from the boot camp, because I didn't apply to anywhere. I didn't apply to any companies. I just tried to help my friend start a startup. I got a contract job just by talking to somebody at a meetup. I did a lot of hackathons and did a lot of volunteering and stuff. So I was coding every day for that whole year before I got my full-time job. But even that full-time job, I didn't apply. It just somebody I met while I was volunteering at Railsbridge. That opportunity came my way from. It started from somebody I met at that meetup. So, yeah, I guess. Yeah, go ahead. Somebody was saying.
Oh yeah. So one thing I would add is, in my experience, the teams I've been on have skewed older at larger companies. So that might be something to consider, is targeting larger, more established, less trendy is not the right word, but it's close. I'm not sure, like, I'm sure that this is in my head to some degree, but my expectation is that this would be worse at startups than at other companies, because startups tend to have the least HR oversight or anything like that.
Yeah, I don't know any statistics, but my first job was actually at a tiny startup. My first full-time job. But I was referred to them. They just needed somebody to help them build the product. And somebody just told them I could do it. So they just trusted that person. And we started off as a contract. So to lower the risk, they did a 1-month contract with me and said, we'll see how it goes. If it works out, then we'll hire you full time. No hard feelings either way. Like if I don't like it or if they don't think it's working out. So that's probably not that common though. It just happened. And somebody asked, why did I not apply? I didn't think that was a very effective strategy, just from like seeing other people do that. And I don't think it's fun. Like I rather just have fun. So I had fun just doing hackathons and trying to help my friend build a product for a startup. So that's what I did. I figured all that matters was that I was getting better. So I just focused on just getting better. I didn't like focus on like searching for a job, but I needed to get a job at some point because I almost ran completely out of money. Like I went to almost $0 in my total net worth. I spent almost all my savings to go to that bootcamp. Even though I was older, I never really was a career person. So I wasn't saving for retirement or anything. I was just kind of carefree and figured like things will just work out. That's just how I was before. And then until I got older and I was like, wait a minute, I need money to retire. So, but yeah, so I just took the different approach by just kept hacking and meeting people. And my thought was that would just, the job would eventually come to me if I get good enough, you know, and people saw what I was building, then that's how I actually got all my jobs. I haven't applied to any of my software engineering jobs in like a cold applying way. They're all referrals, or once you get to like 2-3 years in, like recruiters will just keep messaging you every day. It flips once you get a few years into the industry. So just the hardest part, like we said earlier, is just getting your first job. And I just lower my time preference. Like I just went until I was almost completely out of money. And if I ran out of money, I probably would have just stayed on my friend's couch, because I have friends that are nice and will let me do that. And or I would have just moved back in with my parents to buy me more time.
I liked the actionable takeaway of you can remove dates on the resumes. And then I think the other thing that you said, I don't know if other people heard as strongly, that you didn't think about it. I think that's kind of easier said than done for someone who's already thinking about it. But I feel like with age comes a lot of wisdom and probably a lot of experience, even if it's not even that transferable. A lot of I've seen a lot of younger workers who are not extremely reliable necessarily, and it might be an overgeneralization, but I think people tend to get older and more mature and then become more reliable. You might be able to see a bigger picture of how you can be effective in the company. So recognizing that you have strengths that maybe younger people don't have can just help you shift your thinking of how much you really do bring to a business. So just having that mental shift could be a really important takeaway for you.
Yeah. Also, I think I didn't think about it because my focus was different. My focus wasn't get a job. My focus was get better as a software engineer, which is still my goal. Like, I don't focus on trying to move up to be like a principal engineer. Like, that's not my goal. My goal is just to keep getting better as an engineer. I might end up as a principal engineer as a side effect of that, but like my goal is just simple, just to keep getting better constantly. So yeah, that's probably why I didn't think about it as much, because I had different priorities.
Brady, I want to second what you just said, because I think that's a really excellent point. It's, I think, one of the biggest advantages that bootcamp students bring to the table, most of them, is that they had another career or they had something else that they were doing first. And there are a lot of transferable skills. So I think for someone who's facing some ageism and struggling to break in, if you're not doing this already, like, take a look at what you were doing before and think about what you have there and how that makes, like, what's your story that you're telling? Like, how does that support this change in gears, right? This transition. I've seen a lot of former teachers working at ed tech companies, for example. It's not always that easily transferable, but sometimes it is, right? So that can also be a way to leverage that history.
Totally. That's a good way to sell yourself to you, and to figure out what companies you should apply to. Even in the Lyft apprenticeship, like, I reviewed some of the applications and the personal statements and stuff. Like, if you could tie your previous experience to how that would like help Lyft be a better company, that was like big points, I think, for your like personal interest statement. So knowing how to tie your past experience into whatever company you're applying for, even though you'll be doing software engineering instead of what you did before.
Yeah. I normally loathe writing cover letters, but that's an excellent place to start making this case. And then once you've written it once, you're in okay shape, because you can chop it up and rewrite it for other companies. But
yeah, you can even blog about it too and stuff like that.
Yep. All right, next one here. So in life, you don't know what you don't know. What is something that junior developers don't know that they should when it comes to getting that first job?
Brady, you went through this much more recently than I did. Do you want to answer that first?
Oh gosh. I don't know what you don't know, person who wrote this. No. I think I touched on something that I wish that I had known earlier, that I really got to this state of I didn't take the approach that Sam did, and I think it really has some perks to not necessarily worry about when I could get my first job. However, I was looking for my first job. And so when I was doing that, I got to the point where I was like, I don't care what I'm doing. I just want someone to give me a job. And I wish I had thought more about what the ideal job would have looked like, and um, and remembered to. So I guess this is the second thing that I wish that I would have known. Just keep things fun. Um,
Yeah, that's the
and
most important advice.
yeah, I got to a place where I was burnt out and it wasn't fun for me. But I think there was a lot of stuff that I could have revisited and done in a different way to make things really fun. Um, I think I didn't find them fun at a certain point, not only because I was burnt out, but because of imposter syndrome. Um, so imposter syndrome coming from the angle of like what's something that junior developers don't know that they should know. I haven't talked to anyone yet who is happy with the speed at which they learn and doesn't feel some level of imposter syndrome. So I guess knowing like how widespread it is, if you're feeling some, you're not alone at all. Um, I guess those are kind of the three things that I wish that I had known after I graduated boot camp. Um, I could probably keep talking on this for a really, really, really long time, but I'm curious what other people think of first.
I think one thing, kind of building off of what you said, I don't think this, I don't know if it's still true, but I don't feel like I heard a lot about this when I was first starting to apply for jobs. But man, looking for jobs sucks. It is an emotional, it can be an emotional roller coaster with like precipitous drops and, and a very stressful boom and bust cycle, right? Where it can be very hard to for it to feel consistent, right? Like, you'll have 2 weeks of not hearing anything, and then the following week you have three phone calls or interviews or whatever, right? And it's like during those preceding weeks it can feel miserable, and then that week where you have all that stuff that you have to prepare for, right, all those interviews, right, then you're super stressed out for those. And then, right, so I think so that's something I wasn't prepared for the first time I started looking for jobs. So that's, I mean, probably y'all are aware of that, but that's normal, as much as it sucks. And like, it can, because you don't have control over scheduling or responses, it can be really important to build your own habit, something that is consistent for you to do. So whether that's, I'm going to spend at least, this much time looking into companies to apply to, or applying to jobs, or whatever it is, giving yourself things that you do have control over, rather than can make it easier to manage the things that your feelings about the things that you have less control over.
Yeah, I was just reading a conversation that took place in a Slack channel that I'm in, and there was a developer who had experience and had been searching for a job. I think it was like 2019, so before pandemic craziness. And he had quit his job because he knew it was time to move on, but hadn't lined anything up for a future job. And he had tracked in a spreadsheet all of these different jobs that he was applying for. Even though he had multiple years of experience, he ended up hearing back from about 60 different companies. And I think it resulted in maybe 2 offers that he chose from ultimately. So even with experience, job hunting is not fun and takes a ton of work, even in like wonderful economic times. So that just like hit me that, man, like it's never a fun process for anyone, which is also why you'll hear us a lot talking about like growing your network and trying to meet a lot of people and work with a lot of people on like open source and hackathons and stuff like that, because obviously Sam can talk to how well that has worked for him. And I am starting to see how much magic that can really create if you're ever looking for a different job. So here we go. I'm gonna move on to the next question.
Before you do that, I did say that I would let y'all know when Scarf showed up. So here he is.
Scarf. Okay. Oh, goodness. Okay, so this is probably going to be a hard answer. Maybe we can talk about some of the usual stacks that we have used at our companies. The actual question is, what are the usual stacks used at a company? But I know that can be very different from place to place.
Yeah, I can just say, like, talk about Jellyvision stack, if that makes sense. So at Jellyvision, we are in a several years long transition. So we have, at this point, I think just one or maybe a couple of components that are still in our old PHP stack. And they're the only ones, and we're in the process of migrating away from them. We have a lot, I would say most of our software now is built in Ruby, most of it Rails, but anything started within the last couple of years, it has been written in Node and with React for front ends. So we have kind of a mixed stack because we've had a couple of transitions, right, from PHP to Ruby on Rails and again to Node. And I think that that's not super uncommon, although it is more uncommon than places that pick a stack and just stick with it.
Yeah, I can give Lyft's stack right now. For front end, it's mostly all Node, React, TypeScript is the recommended technologies to use. And going forward, Next.js is all new services are being recommended to be built on that. Well, they actually built a wrapper around Next.js, so it just helps with all like the Lyft tooling. So that's for front end. For the back end, yeah, a lot of companies still consider Node.js the front end, I guess, because it's still JavaScript. So like the front end stack is Node.js, React. I think sometimes we call it the front end, back end, which makes things confusing. But the true back end services, mostly we use Python and Go. And more so Go now, unless it's doing like some machine learning stuff. I think so. Yeah, that's the main technologies at Lyft. As long as for the web stuff, I don't know what the mobile technologies they're using.
And then at Trunk Club, we have been using also React TypeScript front end, and then our back end is Ruby. And we actually don't use Rails. We use the Sinatra framework. And I actually forget what Nordstrom is. I need to find that out because we are being absorbed by Nordstrom. So we'll probably be switching over all of our stack in the next couple of months. Excuse me, I was trying to not cough. This next one here is, do you think mentorship is critical to have when you start at a company?
I don't know if I would use the word critical, because I think that implies that you need to have it. And lots of people don't get it. Most people don't get it. With that said, if you can get it, it can be incredibly helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the way you put that. I agree.
Yeah, I agree too. I have a mentor at Lyft, but yeah, I don't think it's super critical, but if it's available, it's a bonus.
Yeah, it's only going to help, I imagine.
Yeah. And it's also important to note that your mentor doesn't have to be, you can have a mentorship relationship with someone outside of your company, and that will probably make it easier for you to find one. Most companies don't have a formal mentorship program. I helped start one at Jellyvision for the technology department. It's a decent amount of work to set up and run, so most companies don't. So then you're kind of relying on either informally finding one or, looking elsewhere.
That was actually one of the questions that I asked when I was interviewing at my company. I was curious if they had any sort of mentorship program, and it was somewhere between formal and informal. Like, essentially, when I started, I was matched up with someone and I paired with them every single week. And now finally we're implementing more of a formal mentorship, like, this is the material that you're going to cover in these weeks. And these are the specific people who are designated as mentors. But even just being able to pair with somebody was really great because they knew way more than I did.
Yeah. So I think mentorship and onboarding often get conflated or sort of spoken in the same breath for obvious reasons. But yeah, I would say from like an engineering management standpoint that onboarding is critical. And if you don't have good onboarding, you have a problem. Many engineering teams do not have good onboarding and do also have problems. So I think asking about the onboarding, asking about if there's a formal or informal mentorship process, I think those are great questions to ask in an interview, because one of the things that lets you know is how the company feels about investing in their engineers, right? There was a question earlier about like, what to look for, or what are companies looking for junior developers like? And I said, well, they should be looking to invest. This is one of the ways that you can tell that, right? You can ask questions about that give you a sense of how junior developers are supported on that team, right? And that can be the difference between a company that's looking for cheap skills and one that's looking to invest.
Yep, great point. Okay, this one here is, what do they mean in a job application when they ask for code samples? Are they referring to your portfolio or some algorithms you've written?
I've never asked for code samples, so I'm not really sure, but I feel like no one has ever rejected my GitHub as being insufficient. So if you've got stuff on GitHub or Bitbucket or wherever, if you have, code that you've written that they can see, I wouldn't worry too much about it past that. Like if in terms of what is or isn't a code sample, again, like I was saying before, you want to tailor what you send them to what you think they're looking for. So you might want to direct them to a specific project that you worked on, as opposed to like, yeah, here's my GitHub, good luck. Let me know if you find anything interesting, right?
Yeah, definitely. I would pick like the project that you're most proud of, or like if it was a group project, try and pick out like a piece of it that you worked on, then you can like point it out to them.
Yeah, I would not recommend sharing using a group project unless you have. I mean, yeah, I would not recommend using that for a code sample. If there's something that you did on that project that makes for a good story, by all means tell it, or reference it in your resume or however you want to use it. But when someone's asking for a code sample, they want to know this is code you wrote. And it's a little tricky with group projects. I'm not going to run git blame to see who wrote which lines of code, so it makes it it muddies the water in a way that doesn't help you. And if you only have group projects to show, that's kind of a signal. I mean, that should be a red flag for you, but it's definitely going to be a flag for your interviewer.
All right. So this next one is, what should I say when asked about salary requirements? Are there any general tips for salary negotiation for a junior developer?
Yeah, so there's an essay on salary negotiation by, I always forget his real name, but his internet name is Patio11. Looks like Brady is maybe looking it up. I think it's Patrick something. Anyways, he has a fantastic essay on salary negotiation that I always go back to every time I'm looking for a job. I think the most important thing is not saying a number. So on forms that require you to put something in, I will pick the lowest option and say, I am picking this because it wouldn't let me leave it blank, right? And making sure the recruiter understands that. Often it's like 0, right, that you can choose. And then people know like, oh. And then just people are going to try and force you to give a number. Generally speaking, the rule of negotiations is whoever says the number first loses. So you want to hold off on talking about money basically until as long as you can. Yeah, you should definitely have a number in mind. Yes, that's another thing. You should know what you're looking for. But the point of making them say a number first is that they might say a number higher than you would have, right? So also the other thing, another reason you want to push it farther back, even if you do end up saying a number first, is because the more time and energy they invest in you, the more excited they are about bringing you on, the more power you have in negotiation. Yes, Kelzumius. That's exactly the one. That's the article there. Yeah. Yeah, and so like a good way to sort of defer is to say something along the lines. I usually say something along the lines of, I'm not really comfortable talking about compensation quite yet. I'm sure if I'm a good fit for the team, if this is a good fit, I'm sure we can come to something that we can both agree on, right? And then, that usually works. I will say that some of this is hard-won education. I did not have a number in my head, and I was not prepared for a salary negotiation when I got my second job, and the speed with which the recruiter said yes told me all I needed to know about how badly I had done. And when I moved on to my next job, I was getting 50% more than I had been at that second job, because I did not even like especially good, just like not a terrible job of negotiating. I also had more experience, but it was definitely, it would not have been that stark if I had done a better job. So another tip, don't tell them your previous salary. It's none of their business. It has nothing to do with how much value you're going to bring to the company. So just don't ever tell them. And anyone who insists on it, you probably don't want to work with them anyways. I mean, your mileage may vary, right? If I don't know what your situation is, but like,
I think it's illegal in California for their employer.
It's illegal everywhere, but people still try.
Yeah. Well, I don't know is it recent that it's legal everywhere or illegal everywhere?
I think
yes.
it's recent. Cool. Yeah. I think it just came up in the past couple of years.
Yeah, and California definitely was before the rest of the country.
Yeah.
And also, even if the company gives like a salary band, like we only pay people from this amount to this amount for this position, it doesn't mean you can't get more. So you can always negotiation is on the table.
Yeah. Another thing that's important is sorry, Sam, I cut you off.
I was just gonna say, as the years go on, you kind of learn what you're worth. So it's just hard in the beginning.
Another thing that can be useful for sort of deferring the conversation, or just as a negotiating tactic, is to make sure that you say something along the lines of like, I want to look at the compensation package as a whole, right? Like trying to communicate that you understand that the cost of hiring someone is actually much greater than their annual salary, right? I forget the number, but I think it's somewhere around twice the cost of, because you've got benefits, you've got, what they pay into Social Security, right? There's all sorts of things that a company is paying for on top of your annual salary. And like, maybe for whatever reason, the company can't budge on the salary number, but they have more flexibility on PTO, right? So you can ask for, so so you're doing two things by saying something like that, right? You're communicating that you understand the bigger picture, and you're indicating that you're willing to take, some other benefits in lieu of money if that's on the table, right? Like, And I highly recommend that you negotiate for PTO, extra vacation when you can, and not to work at places, if you can avoid it, that have unlimited PTO. That's almost always a scam.
And if anyone is at that stage where they know that they need to negotiate and are looking for like the words to actually negotiate, if you're in the Slack channel, just send me a DM and I'd be happy to talk with you on that. I think everyone should negotiate after they get an offer, no matter what.
Yeah, another thing that is mentioned in that essay is that usually when you're negotiating, the person you're talking to is a business person, and that is one of the main ways that business people communicate. And so when you don't do it, that's communicating something to them as well, right? And it's usually not a great thing.
All right. Next one here is it important to like the product you are working to build? Is this the most important as you continue past being a junior, or is tech working, or is tech working with the most important versus, I'm not understanding this, I'm so sorry. Or is the tech you're working with the most important versus like the product that you're building with this tech?
Yeah. So I don't know if this was intended that way, but I think this is a personal question, so I'm happy to answer for myself. But I think this is a question that everyone has to answer, for themselves, because, some people work at Palantir and don't care that they're building, the infrastructure for fascism. Like, that's a choice that people can make, and they might say, well, I don't really care what it's doing. All I care about is the cool algorithms we get to write. That is a choice, right? People, you can do that. I've worked on, especially when I was working at a consultancy, I worked on a bunch of relatively small marketing sites and medium-sized applications for bigger businesses. And it's I didn't love any of those projects that we did, but I learned a lot about programming, right? That was my first job, right? I learned a lot about working. It's my first job ever. No, that's not true, but it was my first legit job, with a boss. Nope, that's not true either. Anyways, in an office, that's what it was. It was my first job in an office. So it's kind of up to you. And I think it's important to be honest with yourself about what you're getting, what you're looking for from the job that you're trying to get. I think that does get more important later on, because I think the most important thing for a lot of people trying to get their first job is just getting that first job. I do think it's also important, even at that stage, to think about what kind of products you wouldn't work on, right? I turned down Facebook and Amazon recruiters when they reach out to me, because I think those are unethical companies and I don't want to work at them. That's a freedom I have now. That's a decision that you have to make for yourself. But I think it's important to spend some time thinking about it and thinking, it's okay to be disinterested or actively dislike the product. Well, probably not actively dislike, but be disinterested in the product. I think that's okay. If you know what you're getting out of it that is not that, right? And there was another point I was going to make. But I will say that caring about what your company does is going to make it easier to get the job, especially if you can connect, right? You want to be able to tell a story about yourself in a way that that company hiring you for that position fits in a clear and obvious way that benefits both of you, right? So that can be easier when you can make connections. But I've been in ed tech, I was a teacher, then I moved into ed tech, and, I wanted to move to to focus on this part of ed tech, which is why I'm applying here, right? And so product can be one vector for that story, but the tech could also, right? So I don't think there's one answer. For me, I do care about the product. I have some pretty strong feelings about what the importance of doing work that doesn't hurt or take advantage of other people, and finding morally neutral companies to work for in tech is actually not super easy sometimes. Capitalism. But so for me, that's where I start, is, does it meet my standards for ethical behavior? And then it's like, what's the culture like? What's the product? What's the work balance life? And also, is the tech stack, or, are the good, interesting, right? So that's, I would say, probably the order of importance for me. Like, I've worked on with a lot of different stacks. There are always interesting problems to solve. It's not, the language isn't gonna change that too much. So yeah, I focus less on the tech these days than I do on other things.
Yeah. I agree. It probably is a personal question. I have talked to people who were kind of preventing themselves from applying to places because they weren't super passionate about, I don't remember what the actual example was, but I'm just gonna, because I know Clorox had been hiring a bunch of junior devs for a while. Say it was Clorox, he was like, I just can't pretend that I'm super passionate about this product, but they have jobs, and when it goes to be time to actually talk to that company, how can I can't be disingenuous and pretend like, oh yeah, this is great. And that is kind of when I realized there is a lot of other stuff that, as a junior, you're going to have a lot of things to learn. So if anything else aligns, again, the tech stack, I don't think it's lying to say, I'm really excited to work in a place that has enough of a, if you are interested in working at a bigger company, that might mean that there's more resources for mentors, and maybe it is the languages that you're interested. There are a lot of other things that you can be really passionate and excited about versus the end product. I also, yeah, it's worth looking into the company as a whole and seeing if there are other things that maybe the company is doing that you don't agree with. But you don't have to be lying about your interest in joining a company, even if you're not passionate about Clorox wipes or whatever the thing is.
Right. And it's also important to remember, if you're going for applying to a software engineering or junior developer role at Clorox, like the product you're working on is not Clorox, right? It's going to be a marketing website or, inventory management tools, right? Like it's going to be something else. So as much as possible, you want to think about what that something else is. And then like I was saying earlier, there are hard problems everywhere, right? So do a little research on the industry, on what your team, if you can, what the team is working on, and then, look for the problems that might be interesting to you there.
Yeah. I also dropped key values, which we seem to drop every week in the chat. That can also help you figure out what your values are. So the site lists a whole bunch of values, and like it might help you figure out like things that you didn't realize that you care about, and then you can see what companies align with your values, or it helps you try to find companies that you're more likely to align with.
Yeah. I am so excited that we're finally at this time to ask this question. It's been bouncing around and I've been excited to read it. How do you twirl your pencil like that, Avner?
Yeah. So that's a good question. I don't know how to answer it. I've never successfully taught anyone else to do it this way, but the reason I spin my pen this way is because I couldn't spin my pen the way my older brother spins a pen, and I thought it was really cool, and I just couldn't do it. So I just kind of started bouncing it, and then I don't know. I spent a lot of time in the car at one point in my life. I worked out in the suburbs, and I had like a lot of driving, so I listened to a lot of NPR and threw my pen around the car a lot. I'm actually pretty pleased with myself that I've only dropped it once during this recording. It's usually quite a bit more frequent than that, which maybe Brady remembers, because I do this a lot. I like to have something to do with my hands, and I am also taking notes here, so I have a pen at all times. Yeah.
I actually don't remember that. So.
Oh, I'm happy to hear that. I annoy myself sometimes with it, so I just kind of assume everyone who has to work next to me is annoyed about it, which is not great, not recommended. But
all right, that's probably as much as we can talk on that.
Probably too much.
The next one is, what are some telltale signs that you know your first dev job is a solid dev job where you will be able to grow your coding skills and grow professionally?
I mean, I think a lot of what I said about onboarding and mentorship earlier applies here. How much effort does it feel like they put into welcoming you to the team, and how much effort is there to help you grow both as a programmer and professionally, right? So I think those are all things that you'll feel pretty viscerally when you start a new job, right? I've started jobs where, right, I was handed a book. Here, teach yourself C#. And I've had jobs where, they're like, here's the wiki. The last time it was updated was the last time we hired someone. If you find any errors, update the wiki, right? And then I've also had places that had a formal onboarding program. That was one of the things I put in place at Snap Mobile, the mobile. I was an engineering manager for a small mobile consultancy for a minute before I joined Jellyvision, and that was one of the things we put in place. Right, we had a formal onboarding program where it was like, here's what's expected of you, here's what resources we're giving you, right? And we had it broken down where like you spent, now I don't remember exactly the length, but I think it was like 2 weeks where you started off pairing with, they were assigned a mentor, so they would pair with their mentor every day, and slowly over time, they would be, as they were getting more familiar, they would be given, their mentor would say, okay, here, you go do this, right? Until by the end of that period, they were expected to be able to be given tasks like any other junior dev, right? So we had like a formal program. Most places don't have a formal program. They'll have some sort of, like wiki documentation. And this is another thing that tends to track with size. The bigger a company is, the more resources there are for that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, for Lyft is really awesome. It's probably the best onboarding process I had. I think it was like 2 weeks of like onboarding, just like classes of all the Lyft infrastructure and stuff like that. Even though I'm doing front end, we also had classes about like back end stuff, just so we know how things work and how to deploy and stuff like that. So right from the beginning, I could tell it would be awesome. And they have like good benefits. Like I can take any Udemy class I want. Lyft has like a business account. So that's awesome. Previous company, Pivotal, they gave us like $2,000 a year educational stipend. So if you want to go to workshops, or you could use it for anything for educational, you still have to get it approved by your manager. But you can ask all those kind of questions like upfront, like, do they have educational stipends? Like, what if I want to take a workshop? What if I want to buy a book? When I worked at Here Technologies, they had a O'Reilly Books subscription, which costs like $400 a year if you buy it yourself, I think. And I could just take online classes on that O'Reilly Books site, or I could read the ebooks and stuff. So just by asking them what kind of educational content you can kind of get before you even start working there, you can see how much they care about like educational resources and stuff.
Yeah, I don't think I asked about educational resources. I think they were excited to tell that to me at my company. And then one of the things
I ask all the time. I think that's one of the
it's
questions
important.
I always
Yeah,
ask.
now I always will. One of the questions that I asked everybody on my on-site was just, what do you like about working here? And it was very clear that across the board, everybody was amazed at how smart the people were that they got to work with, and they enjoyed the problems that they were tackling. They just hearing how much everybody enjoyed working there because of the other people that work there. I thought that was a really good sign. If there was anyone toxic, I didn't interact with that person, and I still have not had experiences with toxic people in our workplace. So that came through loud and clear just in my interview. I'm trying to think of anything else that hasn't already been mentioned. I mean, I also got to pair with other people on my team for really great onboarding. Yeah, I think that's maybe all I can think of.
Yeah, I think also you can ask in an interview, like, how do you support junior developers, right? Like, you can just ask them how they plan to support you. And hopefully that will tell you something about how they plan to do that.
Okay, we've got a two-parter here. How can you navigate a situation where you're in the final stages of interviews with a company and they offer you a position? They may offer you a position soon, in like about a week, and then another company you applied for a while ago, but you're much more interested in, just reaches out to begin that hiring process.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. If you're closer together in terms of like where you're at, like, you know, if you get one offer and you're still in the final stages with another company, that's an easier situation where you can try and draw things out. You can also tell them, like, I appreciate it. I'm really interested. I'm also really interested and waiting to hear back from another one. I'm like most places, you know, any place that rescinds their offer because you asked for a week, that's probably a bad sign. Like, still sucks to have an offer rescinded, but yeah. So with that said, I've definitely known people who have started a job and then left within a couple of weeks because of a situation like this. They ended up getting an offer from another company that they were more interested in, and there's no real good way to handle this. Like, it's gonna suck to do that, but you know, you don't really owe a company you just started at anything. Getting hired is not a favor that a company does for you. It is a mutually beneficial relationship. So, like, yeah, it's going to be a letdown for some people that we're excited to work with you. It's going to be a letdown. Like, you're not going to enjoy it either. But you know, I guess my recommendation is, if you can't get them, yeah, I don't have a real recommendation. I just have some rambling. Those are my thoughts, though.
You might, if you're open to talking to that company that you're farther along in the process with and saying, hey, I need a little bit of extra time to think and see how this other situation goes, you might also be able to go over to that company and let them know, hey, just so you know, I'm very far along in the process of this other company. I would, I want to give you guys a chance. And some places might be willing to speed some of that process up for you. Yeah, that's my thought.
Yeah, it's really subjective question. But yeah, I mean, if a better opportunity comes your way, especially if it's much better, I would probably take it.
Yeah. If you are going to try and leverage your other offer to try and speed up the process, you should be prepared for them to say, that's okay, you go ahead and accept that offer. We don't need to take this further, right? So, because that is a possibility. So it is something to be aware of.
All right, we can move along. I'm going to let you interpret this however you'd like, either like personally or as a company that you're working at now. Tell me about your technical principles or vision. Or if Mario wants to add any more details about what sorts of information you're looking for, go ahead and let us know.
That's a pretty open-ended question.
Yeah. I don't have a problem with the question. It's just taking me a minute to figure out what my answer is, because I don't think I've ever been asked that. I think my technical principles, I don't know if this counts as principles, but I try to have I try to focus on a few things. One is like the user. Another is my coworkers. And that drives things like a focus on readability of code over cleverness of code. Things like a focus on consistency over on consistency, right? So I'm trying to remember what the name of this anti-pattern is. That there's like an anti-pattern called like sediment or something about layers. I'm blanking on what it's actually called, but you often see this in code bases that have lasted longer than the average engineer lasts on a team. What you'll see is that part of the code base was written in one way, and then someone else, some new engineer, took over the project and said, oh, that old way was bad. We're going to start doing everything this way. And so now you have a whole part of the code base that's written in a different way. And then someone else comes and says, oh, that's bad. And now you have 3 different ways of how the code is written. But they never got rid of the old ones, right? Maybe they chipped away at it, right? But it never fully replaced it. So now in order to be effective in this code base, you have to be able to hold and transition between all of those different ways of developing and thinking about the code base, right? And so that's an anti-pattern that's very common. And so a focus on consistency is like, it may not be what we understand as the most technically correct way to do things right now, but there's value in keeping this code base consistent. That, right, like we don't have the authorization to rewrite this entire component, and so we won't. Like, we know that that's not going to happen. So attempting to do it piecemeal without putting real effort and investment behind it is actually just creating new problems. Yeah, I think that's probably all I have. Oh, I will say this, that like part of being user-centered, it's not just user, it's people. And that mostly comes into play in terms of like picking where I'd like to work and where I'm going to apply, like I was saying earlier.
Yeah, I see Sam also did a plus 100 on the simple over something clever. I also...
That's my number one thing, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, you're writing code so that other humans can pick up and continue the code exactly like what you were saying in a very cohesive style, so that it kind of seems like one person wrote the entire project, even though you're a bunch of people jumping in and jumping out of the code. We just went through a whole process of thinking of tech principles, and it's partially, actually, I don't think that point ever came up. A lot of it was just we really enjoy the fact that our company encourages people to ask a lot of questions, teach, learn, and it's more of kind of the human aspect of our technical department, and making sure that if you're basically in a place of privilege, if you are someone who feels good about speaking up in a room, also making sure that you're watching out for other people who maybe don't, and just making a really nice work environment for people. Alrighty. Next one is blogging seems to be a popular recommendation. Which platforms would you recommend? Also, which portfolio projects would you recommend? Okay, that's kind of a two-parter.
I don't really blog. I have one. I can't remember the last time I updated it. I do technically have one, but so I don't know what the answer is here. I use WordPress. Most of the internet uses WordPress. It depends what you want out of it.
Yeah, I don't think it matters that much. A lot of people use Medium. I think Dev2 I'm seeing more. I've never gone on that platform, but I'm seeing more of those pop up in my feed. But some people just make their own. They just make that's like their personal project too. They made their own blogging site using like Netlify or something like that. Netlify, and I think there's a stack people use. I forget what Netlify and Contentful or something like that. I forget what it's called, to make your own blogging platform.
And then
Yeah.
as for, oh, sorry, go
No,
ahead.
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to jump to the second part of the question.
Oh, okay. So I will say I would recommend using WordPress or something similar over like a site like Medium, where it's kind of aggregated, where you own the content less. That would be my recommendation.
So that second part of the question then is, which portfolio projects would you recommend? For me, the only thing that comes to mind is make it unique and like your original project. We've talked previously about, like, if you have a problem that needs to be solved, go ahead and dive into that, fixing that problem, because that'll guarantee that you're excited about it. You can really dig into technical issues that come up and stop you from, or like blockers. You're going to be really motivated to solve those blockers. And then you're going to be excited whenever you talk about the project to people.
It's more interesting too if your project solves a real world problem. I think it stands out a lot more. Even like I did a thing on LinkedIn a couple months ago where I just asked people to post what projects they're working on, and then I reviewed every single one. And like the one that stood out to me the most was this person made this this email like template builder. It's like a no code kind of application. He's a bootcamp student, and yeah, it was really nice. And he made a YouTube video like demoing the product. It seemed really good, and yeah, he just got hired at Shopify. So
nice. I'm just going to lean on what I've said previously about trying to match your projects, your portfolio pieces to the trajectory that you want to have and the places you're trying to apply to. So, you know, if you have some interest in data science, and you're planning to apply to like data engineering teams or whatever, you should probably have some portfolio pieces where you're doing some sort of, you know, something with data, right? You know, if you're really trying to work, you know, for, I don't know, I don't have another good example, but try and think about where you want to go and where you want to get a job and what can prove that you can do that job.
yep. Also, one more recommendation that I personally like. I just like to make stuff that's funny. So, I mean, it's just like, it just becomes like it's not a chore. It's just like, I'm making this to like make myself laugh. And then other people might think is funny too. And sometimes it turns out to be something really huge. Like our previous guest was Eric Nakagawa, who created I Can Hedge Cheeseburger, which was the first meme generator, I think, on the internet. But that he ended up selling that site for like $2 million, like not even a year after he like launched the site. And I think he just made it because he thought it was funny. So yeah.
Yeah, those are fun, showing, you know, projects that show your personality. And I just dropped a link to a project that I knocked out in an afternoon while I was when I was a teacher at DVC. Just came out of some bullshitting that I was doing with some of the other staff, and we were making fun of someone for liking candy corn.
Yeah. Yep, that's the worst candy.
Yeah, and I got to build a candy corn out of CSS, right? Like that's, you know, that was fun. It's like a kind of weird technical challenge also. People are doing some wild shit with just CSS these days. And so that was, you know, it was an excuse to play around with CSS. And
I like those kind of projects a lot more than like clones of like existing products and stuff like that. I don't know. I just like funny stuff. So I like those kind of, so it's also subjective to the person that's looking at it. But I have a lot of stuff in my GitHub. It's just stuff that I thought it was funny.
Yeah. I think it's also, I mentioned earlier that like focusing on completing a project is good. And these kinds of projects can be really good for that because like, right, this site has been up for a couple of years now, and I don't think I've ever changed it. No, I changed it once when my wife pointed out that there was a spelling error. But you know, it's this project is done, right? Having completed projects is really good evidence that you can complete projects.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Here is a follow-up question. So many companies want passion for their projects. Oh, this is probably going back to, is the tech or the actual product better? So if so many companies want passion for their projects, how do you feel about showing passion for learning or tech versus the project?
So in my opinion, if a company is hiring junior developers, then they should definitely prefer a passion for learning over anything else, because they should be aware that all junior developers are going to need to learn a lot on the job. And that's part of the deal, right? That's why junior developers get paid less, because they take more effort to make them effective from the company. There were a lot of shoulds in there because that's not how all companies approach junior developers. So to some degree, I think you're going to have to make judgment calls based on the companies you're applying to and, you know, the vibe you're getting from the interviewer. But I think, you know, I think showing a passion for learning is what is ideal. And if a little more difficult to show, in the same way that like, oh yes, I'm really excited about Node, check out these projects I did, right? Like that's an easier story to tell. Like the tech is the easiest story to tell. But I think learning is absolutely the most important thing I'm looking for, is an appetite for learning in junior developers, and teachability.
Yes, very important. And it's just past 4 now. This is actually directed to Sam anyway. Probably referring back to that scenario where someone had one job that they were really, really interested in, but just started to hear back from. Turns out maybe it's Lyft. So Sam, do you think that Lyft would speed up the apprenticeship timeline?
Well, I don't think that would be a good idea, right? They want to make sure they choose the right people. So I think it's good that they take their time to pick up the right people. I mean, 1,000 people applied, so it's not like they can process all those applications like in a couple days. Especially since Lyft laid off 17% of the company in March, so they're probably understaffed as well. I would assume because Lyft did a company-wide layoff. It wasn't just in specific departments. I think it was like across the board 17% layoff. So
That's rough.
like all the teams are pretty like stretched thin. So I would assume recruiting is the same. So that might be why it's taking longer, but it's also taking long because it's 1,000 applications. So Microsoft is a little smarter. They cut it off at like 300. I think maybe, I don't know if Lyft should think about doing that, but it's also a bunch of stages. So like the first round, they cut some people, and then now there's like this whiteboard assessment, and then I don't even know what the whole process is. This is my first time um, seeing what the apprenticeship is like at Lyft.
Well, that is all of the questions that have been asked, and I haven't checked in. I don't know what the rest of your day looks like, and if you have a hard stop and need to get going right now, Avner. But typically, we'll stop the recording, and then people can introduce themselves if they'd like. So if you're able to hang around, we would love to have you. If you're not able to, no stress. But I will go ahead and stop recording at this point.